Hello. In this video I'm going to talk about special structures of the cell membrane, the stuff we find outside of cells, talk a little bit about gene expression, and about cell division. So kind of a whole bunch of miscellaneous topics regarding cells. So first of all, I want to talk about special structures that the cell membrane can form. And these include cilia, microvilli, and flagella. So if you look at the picture on the right hand side of the screen, and if you look towards the top of that picture, you see what looks like tall grass and short grass. The tall grass are cilia and the short grass are microvilli. These are specialized folds of the cell membrane. In the case of the microvilli, the short grass, these specialized folds are functioning to help increase the surface area for absorption into the cell. And so you would see these kinds of folds on the cells that are lining your intestines, because your intestines are your main organ for nutrient absorption, and the microvilli increase your surface area for absorption. You absorb 99.9% of all the nutrients that you eat because of these microvilli. Cilia look similar, but they are different. Cilia do not increase surface area for absorption. The cilia are mostly there to move things across the surface of the cell. Cells can pass along things from one cell to the other by waving their cilia. For example, this is how an egg is passed down a fallopian tube. Or, a little bit more grossly, this is how mucus is passed up your trachea to your mouth. Flagella are a very specialized structure of the cell membrane. These are the tails that we see on a sperm, and they help the sperm to swim. So what's found outside of the cell membrane? When we look at cells in the human body, what do we find outside of the cells, right? Well, we tend to find this matrix of stuff. We call it extracellular matrix, or sometimes we get lazy and just call it matrix. Extracellular matrix tends to be composed mostly of proteins and some protein-carbohydrate combinations. There's also a major fluid component outside of our cells. We call that extracellular fluid, or sometimes, depending upon where we're looking in the body, we might refer to it as interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid means tissue fluid, so that's referring to the fluid that is in the tissues but not actually in the cells themselves. So when we look in the cell, we see that there's cytoplasm, and the cytoplasm contains the cytosol and organelles, right? And I have a whole separate video on organelles, right? But then there's also the nucleus. Some people classify the nucleus as an organelle and some don't, but we're not going to nitpick there. But I'm mentioning the nucleus because I want to talk about DNA and chromosomes in genes. And we find DNA inside the nucleus. So in this picture here, the big purple circle in the center is the nucleus, and this is the protective housing for our DNA inside of our cells. Now, we can find our DNA in different forms. Sometimes the DNA is kind of loosey-goosey, and sometimes it's packaged up. The packaged form of DNA is called a chromosome, and that's what we see here on this picture. This picture is actually called a karyotype. A karyotype is a pictorial organization of all of the chromosomes from a cell or organism. This is a human karyotype. We're looking at 46 chromosomes here, right, found in 23 pairs. Sorry, they're not really these pretty rainbow colors. Those are fake colors. Right? So a typical somatic human cell contains 46 chromosomes. Okay? And we have 2 of every chromosome. We have 2 chromosome number 1s. We have 2 chromosome number 2s. We have 2 chromosome number 21s. Right? And the reason why we have 2 of every chromosome is because you inherited 1 from your mom and 1 from your dad. And it's nice to have an extra copy because if one's broken, you have an extra copy you can use. Take a minute and see if you can determine if this is the karyotype of a male or a female. You might have noticed towards the bottom, we don't actually have 23 pairs of chromosomes. The 23rd pair isn't really a pair here. It's the X and the Y chromosome. Presence of the Y chromosome is what determines maleness in humans. For a female, this would have an X and an X chromosome. Now, chromosomes are made of DNA, right? DNA is made of smaller units called nucleotides, right? We know them better by their letters A, T, G, and C. Right? And if we just take a sample chromosome, let's take chromosome number 1. We see that chromosome number 1 contains 492 million A's and T's and G's and C's. Right? These A's and T's and G's and C's can be read, and when they're read as a group, we call that a gene. So a gene is a sequence of DNA nucleotides that has the information to make protein. So chromosome number 1 has 492 million nucleotides. It has 2,968 genes, right? So almost 3,000 genes on just this one chromosome. And don't forget, one chromosome is really just one piece of DNA, right? On the picture here, we actually see a series of diseases that are known to be associated with gene mutations for chromosome number 1. Somewhere on here there is the fish odor syndrome disease, and colon cancer, leukemia, several different diseases are associated with chromosome number 1. Down at the bottom here we see this X structure, and that's representing a chromosome. But if we follow it all the way to the top, we can see genes. And the point of this picture is to remind you that chromosomes contain genes. So a single chromosome can contain thousands of genes, which means that a single chromosome could potentially make thousands of proteins. The process of reading the information in a gene, in other words, reading the information in the DNA and using that to make a protein, is called gene expression. So our cells use the information in DNA to make protein. In other words, we read the information in a gene, part of the DNA, and make the corresponding protein. So that is the process of gene expression. So when we say that DNA gives us our traits, right? DNA carries the code for our traits. It's really the proteins that we make based on the DNA that gives us our traits, our eye color, for example, or how tall we are. So now we're going to leave the topic of gene expression, and we're going to talk about cell division. So cell division is what it sounds like. It's cells dividing and multiplying. And why do cells divide? Why do we need cell division to occur in the human body? Right? Well, we need cell division for growth. So if we want to, become larger than we are when we're born, right? We also need cell division for repair, right? So if we want to repair dead and dying tissue, right, we need cell division to occur. Now, remember, in the body there are two main types of cells, somatic cells and germ cells. Germ cells make eggs and sperm. Somatic cells are everything else. And they both divide very differently. And this is because the germ cells need to take their chromosome number down by half, right? The process of a germ cell dividing is called meiosis. Somatic cells divide through a process called mitosis, and it's basically just a process of cloning. You take one cell, right? You double its DNA and split it in half, and now you have a clone, right? The two cells that you get at the end of mitosis are identical to each other, and they're identical to the cell that started the process in the first place. Normally, cell division is very carefully regulated. We have multiple proteins inside of our cells that regulate cell division. However, sometimes excessive cell division does occur, and that can lead to tumors. Fancy name for tumors is a neoplasm. So a tumor is just really an enlarged mass of cells that are exhibiting abnormal cell growth and division. Tumor does not mean cancer. Right? Benign tumors are not cancerous. Right? Malignant tumors are cancerous. What makes cancer cancer is when you have uncontrolled cell growth that's having a deleterious effect on the body. And deleterious is just a fancy word for bad. Right? What makes malignant tumors malignant is the fact that they are either invasive and or metastasizing. To be invasive, basically the tumor mass is pushing into another tissue, causing it to malfunction. Good example of this is brain tumors that form on the meninges of the brain. So you have these membranes on the outside of your brain, and sometimes a tumor starts to form there. And at first, nothing bad really happens, but as the tumor grows larger, it presses on your brain tissue, causing the brain tissue to malfunction. So that's invasive. And some tumors metastasize. Right? And what that means is that they actually shed cells. That's what we see here in this picture. We're starting off with an abnormal cell that undergoes multiple cell divisions, creating a primary tumor. And then the cells from the primary tumor are shed into the bloodstream, travel to a new location, and then start forming a secondary tumor. So that's the process of metastasis. It's the spreading of cancer ultimately. Can someone have cancer without having a tumor? Can you have cancer without having a big mass of cells? And the answer is yes. A good example of this is leukemia. With leukemia, there isn't just one mass of cells. There's an overproduction of malfunctioning white blood cells in the bloodstream. So cancer is caused by damage or mutation to genes. All cancers are genetic because all cancers involve problems with genes. But do you inherit these genes already damaged from your parents, or do the genes become damaged later in your life? Or is it both? The answer is that both are possible. You can inherit already damaged genes, but you can also acquire the damage throughout your lifetime. So we say that some cancers are inherited and some cancers are acquired. In reality, a lot of times it's both coming together that results in the process of cancer. But no matter what, all cancers are genetic because all cancers are caused by damage to genes. Right? It's actually the genes who make the proteins that regulate cell division that get damaged to cause cancer. So how often do cells normally do cell division? Like going back to normal cell division rather than the abnormal cell division, how often do cells normally divide? Right? Well, it depends upon what kind of cell you are, really. Muscle cells and neurons are very bad at cell division. Right? So when a neuron dies, that's pretty much it. You don't get a new one. Exposed cells, such as the cells in your skin and all along your digestive tract and parts of your respiratory tract, those exposed cells are very good at cell division. And stem cells are very good at cell division. Stem cells are a very special type of cell. They can do two things. They can divide and differentiate. To differentiate means to turn into a different cell type. So, for example, in your bone marrow, you have hematopoietic stem cells that can turn into any type of blood cell. Red blood cells, basophils, eosinophils, but they're limited in their differentiation process. Hematopoietic stem cells can't turn into bone cells, and they can't turn into neurons. So the stem cells that we find in our bodies are limited in their differentiation, but they are still capable of cell division. The last topic here is on cell signaling. Right? Cell signaling is looking at how cells communicate with each other. Your body's composed of trillions of cells, and they all need to communicate to make sure that the whole entire you functions, right? A lot of this is done through signaling molecules. Signaling molecules are substances that can send a message from one cell to another. Signaling molecules tend to come in two forms: hormones and neurotransmitters. There are other possibilities in here, but by far the majority of all the signaling molecules in the human body are hormones and neurotransmitters. Hormones are signaling molecules that are released by a cell, and then they travel through the bloodstream, and they travel a far distance to a target cell. And then when they get to the target cell, they cause something to happen in the target cell. Neurotransmitters, on the other hand, do not travel far distances. Neurotransmitters are released into a very small space called the synaptic cleft, and then they just travel right across that very small space to get to their target cell, and then they cause something to happen. They send a message to, in other words, their target cell. What's similar in both of these situations is that we have a signaling molecule, and the signaling molecule has to bind to something on the target cell called a receptor. In the pictures here, the receptors look like green letter Ys almost. So a receptor is a protein that can receive a signaling molecule. And once the receptor receives the signaling molecule, that's when some sort of change happens in the target cell. That's the communication process that's occurring. Similar cells working together as a group are called a tissue. Right? So if we have a whole bunch of cardiac muscle cells working together, we call that cardiac muscle tissue. So similar cells working together as a group to perform a specific function are called the tissue. In the human body, we have four main categories of tissues. Epithelial tissues tend to act as liners. So we're going to find this like lining the outside of your body. It's the outer layer of your skin, for example. Or lining things like the inside of your blood vessels, or lining the inside of your stomach, or lining the inside of your lungs. Connective tissues are a very broad category of tissues. Some of them do connect. So connective tissues include things like dense, regular connective tissue and areolar tissue, right? But they also include things like bone and blood and cartilage. So connective tissues are kind of the junk drawer of the tissues. If it's not an epithelial tissue or a muscle tissue or a nervous tissue, it kind of got thrown into the connective tissue category. So some of them do definitely connect, but some of them have other specialized functions like bone. Bone functions to protect and support the body. Blood is a connective tissue that transports nutrients and gases. Muscle tissue is specialized for contraction, and that means movement, right? So there's three types of muscle tissue in the human body. Cardiac muscle tissue in your heart, skeletal muscle tissue that moves your bones, and then smooth muscle, which is found in the walls of your hollow organs, like the walls of your blood vessels and the walls of your digestive tract. And then last but not least is nervous tissue. And nervous tissue is specialized for high-speed electrical and chemical communication. As we go through this course, we will be encountering these tissues throughout the class, and we'll talk more about them as we get to them.